Oh, I have a good one for you today. What would my 89-year-old badass father, entrepreneur, businessman, grandfather, what does he think about 2022 and today's crazy and insane world? Get that trash out of your life. You have legacies to build. We grew that business from 3.4 million to 17.1. Horsepower, not horse shit. You want to be the parent that's an ally. They don't need another friend. Not everybody's cup of whiskey. Toughest advice for the toughest businessmen. Be relentless. My dad turned 89 years young in September. So my father is in his 90th year. My mom is about to turn 89 and will be in her 90th year just before Christmas. They have seen a lot in their life. And one of the things that I love doing the most is sitting in by the fireplace here. And I've been doing this for probably the last 6 years. Consciously, somebody woke me up to the fact that I need to be asking my mom and dad questions, while they're still here. And, they're both in excellent health. They drive, they live about 15 minutes from here. My mom was riding on the back of the four-wheeler, the ATV, on Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving, which was yesterday. And I walked up to my dad and I said, "Dad, you want to take the four-wheeler for a ride?" This is yesterday. He says, "Well, I don't know. I'm too old." And I said, "Too old for what?" I've never heard those words out of his mouth. So next thing you know, he's got the helmet on and he's jumping up on the machine himself. He's whipping his leg over. It's like riding a horse to get on those big four-wheeler seats. And the next thing you know, he asks, "How do you run it?" And I show him the gas and the brake, and my dad is off into the back field driving the ATV in front of his children and grandchildren in his 90th year. So it's one of the things that I love the most is sitting in the lake house by the fire and just asking my mom and dad questions. But one of the questions I got the other day from one of my my private clients, mastermind member, Adam Serhand, 50 Park Financial Investments, really smart guy from New York and from Florida. And Adam, I was talking to Adam on the phone the other day, and he goes, "Michael, I would love to know what your dad thinks of 2022. Adam's one of these guys where, he lives in the financial markets. He watches all the financial news. He follows very specific people. He's one of these guys very cerebral guy. And he said, "I'd love to know what your father, all the businesses he's run, living, to almost 90 years so far, what would he think of 2022? So I thought that would make an incredible video for you men. And it's been a great exercise for me because I've been sitting in by the fire for the last several years. And we just talk about some specific topic. I asked my dad about his parents. I asked him about his biological parents, his adopted parents. I asked him about his Hall of Fame junior hockey career. I asked him about what it was like to play for the Blue Wings back in the 1950s. I asked him about past presidents. I asked him about health and nutrition. I asked him about, climate change, all this stuff that appears to be new. And as my dad says eloquently, he said, "Michael, there is no new playbook." He says, there is nothing new under the sun. This is from a man who has been on this earth almost 90 years as a businessman, entrepreneur, successful father, successful grandfather, multi-million-dollar businessman. There is nothing new under the sun. And my dad watches the news every day. He follows politics. He's a voracious reader. My dad has read thousands and thousands of books. Since he retired at 85, I would say that he's basically up to a book a week now. All his gifts for his 89th birthday in September were books. I mean, massive books. He's reading the autobiographies and biographies of people like Alexander Graham Bell and Ronald Reagan and George Washington and all these other, it's just insane. So he's never been sharper. He's never been sharper. But so I asked my dad, and I have asked my dad through the years about these different topics. But my dad, it's interesting. The first thing I'll emphasize to you is that there is no new playbook. Everything my dad saw in 1950 and 1960, 1980, 2022, he said he has seen before. He calls it just different gifts wrapped differently underneath the tree. So nothing is new under the sun. That's number one. Nothing is new under the sun. And my dad moved from being, a young guy full of piss and vinegar and aggressive and all that stuff that we've all gone through to, a guy who was always concerned about who was in the White House and who was the president and local politics. My dad ran for politics. He served in politics, and he transitioned into his 60s and 70s. And it was water off a duck's back. He realized that the only difference you can make in this world is through entrepreneurship. And he passed that on to my brother and myself, where he said many times, politics is theater for ugly people. And I've always remembered that quote. And anytime I thought, maybe I should run for mayor or maybe I should run for council, I could make a difference. My dad's been the roadblock on that. And he said, if you want to make a difference, Michael, scale your business, start a new business. But he said, stay the hell out of that swamp of politics. And I have to agree that it's probably some of the very best advice he's ever given me personally. So my dad's done it all. There's nothing he hasn't done, from community service to coaching hockey to coaching T-ball to starting up companies. But what does he think of 2022? And I think after, the number one thing, which I just mentioned, is there is nothing new under the sun. I think the second thing that you would be surprised at is how incredibly optimistic he is. He's passed that mindset down to his children and his grandkids, where I say every day, 2022 is the greatest time in history to be alive. My dad's 89 and he has that exact same mindset. He talks about how he's seen everything from Henry Ford's Model T, which my dad owns. My dad owns a black 1913 original Model T Ford, which was my grandfather's. It's in their garage at home. So my dad can drive a Model T 1913 Henry Ford Model T. He grew up, watching his dad, go to town with, horse and buggy and all this other stuff behind when he was a real young child. He saw the invention of the car. He saw the progression of the car. He saw, pre-internet. Then he saw the personal computer back in the 80s. My dad was in business, so he was on the cutting edge of all those things. Like, he had computers when they were massive. He had a cell phone when it was massive. He was on the cusp of all that stuff. So the second thing I'd emphasize is how optimistic and bullish my dad is. Like, I talk about the markets and the troubles, and he's like, man, we've seen this many times before. He says an opportunity, the next 3 years is an opportunity to separate yourself, to do even better. The best of the best will get better over the next 3 years, the thinning of the herd. He's got a long-term focus, even at his age. Just a positive mindset. He says there's more billionaires now than in history. There's more millionaires ever than in history. I mentioned to him about the other day about inflation, and he said, he goes, Biden and co. He said, they're lightweights next to Jimmy Carter. My dad was knee deep in business in the 1970s with Jimmy Carter wearing his sweater, sitting by the fireplace, with double-digit inflation, gas lines, people lining up, no gas independence, socialism creeping into the American system. And Jimmy Carter sitting on national TV with a sweater on, a cardigan sweater, telling Americans to turn down their thermostats during the winter and to shrink their lives. And that's never a positive message in the greatest country in the world. So he was through the Jimmy Carter horror show. He knows what double-digit inflation looks like. He knows what crashing markets look like. He knows what a tough real estate market looks like. He knows what poor leadership looks like. He knows what the cusp of socialism / communism taste test looks like. And then he lived through he saw the Reagan. He said, Jimmy Carter's son gave us Reagan. Without Jimmy Carter, there's no Reagan. And he says, watch who Biden's going to give us. It's going to give us the next great leader, the next great capitalist leader. So I was just amazed. He told me all the Ronald Reagan stories. He said, they're completely different people. But he said, he says the first Hollywood president, he says, was not Donald Trump. He said the first Hollywood president that he saw was Ronald Reagan. The first celebrity president wasn't Donald Trump. The first celebrity president was Ronald Reagan. And just things like that. He goes, he saw the Trump thing coming a mile away. He said, he's going to get elected. He's going to win. He's different. He's passionate. He speaks to the common man. He's going to get people out that have never voted before. Boom. Donald Trump is president of the United States, and everybody, the experts and the gurus and the talking heads are like, what happened? I mean, they're clueless, right? Not my dad. He sees everything as a cycle. Everything is a complete cycle. I talked to him about the markets and stuff, and he's like, there's going to be a thinning of the herd over the next 36 months. He said, it's all about having your house in order. Your house should be in order all the time. Your finances, your family, your relationships, but basically it wakes us up to cut the rope and cut the cord and to curate all the waste that we don't need in our lives anymore, whether it's wasteful employees, wasteful expenses, wasteful debt. He's like, for the last 2 years, my dad has been saying to me, if you don't need it, get rid of it. If you don't need it, get rid of it. If it's not personal development, get rid of it. If it's not a book or it's not a newsletter or it's not a mastermind or it's not something that makes you better mentally and physically, if it's not your gym membership, if it's not a personal trainer, he says, get rid of it. Any debt, get rid of it. If you don't need that second or third vehicle, get rid of it. And just interesting, he said he's had to get his house in order 5 times in his lifetime. As a successful entrepreneur, he goes, I've done it 5 times. He goes, I've made my businesses, my company, and my personal life lean and mean 5 specific times in his life. Get your house in order, he said. Get your house in order. So once again, optimistic and bullish about things. He says you come out on the other side of this thinning of the herd over the next 3 years. He said you're going to be bigger, better, stronger, and smarter, and all these other things. But he said you got to live on your toes. You got to swing for the fences. You got to Aaron Judge it, man. You got to swing for the fences. You can't. The 99% are going to live on their heels. They're going to watch the news. They're going to listen to the social media, and they're going to do what the herd does. My dad just keeps emphasizing to me, swing for the fences. He goes, this is a time when you watch Buffett and you watch, the richest guys in the world, and they're very selective, but they're, when everybody else is selling, they're buying. When everybody else is buying, they're selling. I asked my dad about health and nutrition, and my dad said, I've seen everything from the keto diet, the caveman diet, to the high carb, eat to win diet. And that brought back memories when I was in the tennis academy in grade 11 and 12. We were on the eat to win diet, which was high carbs. We had spaghetti before every game, every match. We had pasta before every match. And it was lots of fruits and lots of vegetables and drink all kinds of orange juice. High carbs, eat to win diet. And now, you see a progression into the low carbohydrate diet, some people with the high protein. But my dad, he's like, I remember when we weren't supposed to eat bacon and eggs anymore. And my dad's always had the same breakfast for almost 90 years. He has eggs, he has bacon, and he has oatmeal. And here he is he's in his 90th year. And he walks every day for, an hour. He drives, he does everything in his life. And he said he remembers when he was told never to eat bacon and eggs, and eggs were wrong and bacon was wrong, and cholesterol was the big thing. And then my dad, I love when he talks about climate, he calls it He calls it once again, he says that there's nothing new under the sun. He calls it the climate blueprint. In other words, it's what the liberals and the Democrats and the socialists are always up to in terms of, he calls it the redistribution of wealth blueprint, the redistribution of wealth, where you attack the people that are doing well, you attack the businessman, the businesswoman, the entrepreneur. And it's all anti-business, but it's redistribution of wealth. And he says now it's just singing a different song. But one of my dad's best stories is talking about climate cooling. And he showed me this on Time magazine, on the cover of Time magazine in the 1970s. There was a headline, Global Cooling. And global cooling was the thing at the time. And literally, some of these fake scientists were talking about back then polar bears in New York City. Polar bears in New York City. Think about that. But the big thing was, we're all going to freeze to death. We're all going to live in igloos. Polar bears are going to be walking the streets of our northern cities. And if you don't do this, if you don't do that, if you don't shrink your life, if you don't shrink your business, if you don't turn down your heat, if you don't do what Jimmy Carter says, then this is what's going to happen. So my dad has always had a good laugh at then when global warming came in a few years ago. And global warming was a sell. You had the Al Gore pony show, dog and pony show for a while, where teachers in our schools were actually showing the inconvenient truth to our children. So, I mean, just insanity. A former politician turned scientist. And my dad used to laugh his ass off at Al Gore. He's like, look at this guy. And he goes, he can't even spell climate if you gave him a C and an E. And he goes, and then he said he won't be able to sell this for long, because then people will start to wise up eventually, and they'll say, you know what? It's not as bad as you say, and this is fantasy, not reality. Because the planet is always changing. That's a reality. So he said sometimes it's cooling, sometimes it's warming. But he said to me, he goes, it won't be long till they have to change that frame. So after about 2 years of the Al Gore show, all of a sudden global warming became climate change. Because now it was proved that it wasn't warming as much as possible. I don't know. I only play a scientist in these videos. But all of a sudden, the new thing in the media, the new thing on social media, the new thing being sold by the left was, of course, climate change. The climate is changing. The ice caps are melting. You don't go out in the sun. Stay inside your place. Wear a mask. All this kind of stuff. And my dad he was bent over laughing for the last 5 years at this stuff. And he says, Michael, at the end of the day, that's another thing my dad's always taught me: follow the money. He goes, follow the money. Any of these stories, he's like, use your head, follow the money. Climate cooling, follow the money. Climate change, follow the money. Climate warming or global warming, follow the money. And it's the same for everything. He goes, nutrition. He says, high carbohydrate diet, follow the money. Dairy is good for you, follow the money. And just on and on. And so that was always a good one. Another one my dad had a good laugh at too was he said there's a pandemic every 100 years. My dad's a very well-read guy, and he said he calls it manufactured mental illness. So it's been almost 3 years of the restrictions and lockdowns here. My mom and dad were 87 and 88 and 89 through this in years, and I never saw them miss a single thing. My dad would skate with the kids at school. He'd be out skating at hockey. They went to every Blue Wings game. They would meet me for lunch every day. They're in the restaurants. They're 87, 88, 89. They're being told to stay at home by the mass media. They're being told to stay at home by doctors. And here's my mom and dad, and they're like, they don't give a shit. They're like, we're going to live our lives. I talked to my parents because we were concerned at the start when this all happened. It's like, mom and dad, you're at the age where if this is a respiratory virus, this can be something, that's going to affect older people. And my mom and dad were both badass. They're like, you know what? We're going to live our life the way we want to live our life. And yes, we're going to celebrate Christmas. Yes, we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving. If we have to hop on a plane to go on a vacation, yes, we're going on a vacation. Yes, we're going to visit our grandkids. Yes, we're going to visit you guys. Yes, we're going to go to the hockey arena. Yes, we're going to go and have breakfast with Emery. And it was just amazing. They never bought into that narrative at all. And I think it goes back to my dad and mom knowing that they've seen this before. And they didn't see this maybe, you know, they were through it all, but there was no internet. That's the other thing. My dad was like, he goes, Michael, tell me everything. Do you remember SARS? And I was like, well, I remember it. He says, yeah, but he says, you didn't have Twitter, you didn't have Facebook, you didn't have Instagrunt, you didn't have, you know, 24-hour news cycle. It was just coming around then. He says, do you remember the Spanish flu or any of that stuff? And he just went on and on. And he goes, I remember vaccinating, you know, you children with things that needed to be vaccinated for, you know, the mumps and this and that. But he said, back in that day, he said, not every person had a voice, right? Not everybody was a pretend doctor about a flu. Not everybody was a pretend expert about it. So he says the only difference, he said, is that now you have an entire world that has a voice on social media. So he says, you can barely remember SARS. He says, you can't remember, you know, this flu or that flu. So he says, it's much, much easier to manufacture a pandemic. And that's exactly what we saw in 2020 and all the way up to now. And then the next strain and the next strain. He calls it next batter up. He goes, next batter up. You know, there was an election with Trump. There was an election with Biden. My dad's always, he goes, who do you think? What's next batter up? Is it a new strain of the virus, or is it what's next batter up? And when you have that mindset, man, everything just, it's like nothing's new under the sun. Nothing's new under the sun. And life becomes a game and business becomes a game. You breathe easier. You're less stressed. You almost have a smile on your face because it's almost like you know something that nobody else does. It's like my dad brings that wisdom to our lives where it's like, this isn't new. My dad says that constantly. He'll read something that isn't new. A mayor will say this, that's not new. Or they'll pull this isn't new. Or taxation, this isn't new. Or turn down your thermostats, this isn't new. Smart meters he was talking about the other day. He said, we got rid of those smart meters where we live here in Canada, but those were in all the homes over the last 12 years because we had a liberal government in power. As soon as the liberal government is out, then all of a sudden the smart meters in our homes are gone. And now that's something that's being pushed in the United States, especially going to be in democratic states, is here the government's going to tell you how to heat and cool your home. So it's just one vicious cycle after another. And my dad loves politics. He really loves politics, but I love it because it's healthy for him because he sees it as theater for ugly people. Other things, wealth. He's a big believer in things that people need. My dad has done extremely well as an investor on his own. He's earned his own money and he's invested his own money. But he's Buffett style before Buffett. He's like, Michael, what do people need? He says, there's always going to be trash. There's always going to be garbage. There's already, he says, like, we're recycling monsters. He says, what do people need and what will they continue to need no matter how good or bad things are? And, you know, he's like, he's had friends in the sanitation business. He has friends that are in the recycling business. He has friends that are in the million and billion dollar garbage and trash business. And, you know, he's a fundamentalist in terms of gold and silver, you know, Coca-Cola stock. He had some money up until a few years ago in Tupperware, all these different things. And he never invests in anything he doesn't understand. He told me that. He goes, Michael, if I don't understand it, I don't invest in it. I don't care what anyone else is doing. I don't care what the 99% say. I don't care what any investor says. Like, he's like, he goes, I'm responsible for my investments, not my investment agent or my advisor. He says, I tell him what to invest in. But he goes, at the end of the day, he goes, I don't count on any medical doctor. I don't count on any financial consultant. I don't count on any business consultant. He goes, I don't count on anybody else but myself. In other words, the man in the glass. And that's another thing he talks about. He says, you're responsible for yourself. He goes, stop putting people on pedestals. So, you know, like if it's not this doctor expert, it's another doctor expert. And then, you know, a few months later or a year later, you find out that everything they were dispensing was badass wrong. He says, you have to find your own answers. You have to research, you have to study, you have to read. And he says, always get your information from a tiny, tiny circle of proven advisors. Somebody that's already wealthy, somebody that already has an amazing marriage, somebody that's already in great physical health, somebody who's already in great mental health, that kind of stuff. You know, hang around other winners, champions, hang around, winners win. So, you know, when it comes to investments, I always ask him, he's like lean and mean. I got my money in the railroads. I got my money in Coca-Cola. I got my money in gold and silver. I got my money in the banks in terms of investing in the banks. Just fundamental stuff, sanitation. And it's no advice for anyone else. I just love the fundamental. If I don't understand it, son, he says, I do not invest in it, no matter what. And that has proved so great for him. He's done a nice job investing in real estate. He said to me one time, he said, Michael, he said, invest in single level properties without stairs. You have an aging population. He said, invest in properties with at least, he says you at least have, if a commercial, you got to have at least 16 doors. 16 doors is his limit, right? And he didn't buy many of those properties, but he said 16 doors is the minimum. None of this duplex, fiveplex. He says, because you never have cash flow. He says, use the bank's money, invest in a 16, 30plex, whatever it is, but 16 doors is the minimum. And he said, when it comes to residential, he says, buy on the water. Buy on the water and buy within 15 minutes of town or city. Buy on the water. He says, people love water. He says it attracts people. It's good for mentality. It's good for the more stressful life that we live in now. And I mean, look at the advice. Like we bought this place out here for $250,000 16 years ago on the water. And that seemed like a lot at the time, 250 grand. And my dad walked out here for 5 minutes. He's like, look where it is. He goes, it's on the water and it's 5 minutes from town. He goes, where do you sign? So little things like that, common sense. There's nothing new under the sun. And then I had written down a couple things here, but just, you know, covering all the bases, like marriage. He said to me, he goes, you know, your mom and I have been married now for 60 some years. And, you know, he said, you know, it's a clear as kind thing. He goes, you know, good communication. He goes, bad communication starts wars, and good communication, he goes, makes peace. And so always just, you know, clear communication. And my dad was always home at 5:30, and we always had dinner at the supper table. And I never heard him talk business at the table. Like we do, I do talk business on purpose, entrepreneurship here at the table. But my dad, it was incredible. When he was home at 5 o'clock, 6 p.m., he never talked business anymore after that. That was family time. And as far as marriage goes, I mean, my mom was involved in everything. There was no, you know, do this with dad or do this with mom. It was just they were a team. And we call my mom the COO and we call my dad the CEO of our family. And that was my mom. She was the operations person behind. She was the raising of the 3 children. She was the organizing of the home, of the meals. She was the organizer of the vacations and the sports and the activities. And they had their roles and they worked them like magic. But, you know, them living together out there in the home that I was raised in, I mean, they're just, you know, they're best friends, which is huge. They have great respect for each other. And, you know, they're always asking what the other wants and what they think. And I saw that on Canadian Thanksgiving weekend, where my parents are out there and they're still best friends. They're still best friends. They're not the same. They're opposites in a lot of ways. And my mom lets my dad do his thing. He likes to walk. He likes to read. My mom likes to work. She likes to be active, those types of things. But, you know, secret weapon best friends. And that's what's been 60 plus years, going on 70 years. It'll be 70 years. So amazing. I asked my dad about technology. He gets a big laugh out of it because my dad was on the cutting edge of technology. Nobody thinks about that. They say, oh, a 90-year-old guy, what would he know about technology? Well, he knows fucking just as much as you do. And my dad had the first cell phone, the big Gordon Gekko cell phone. My dad had the first personal computer. My dad had the first laptop that was a beast. And here's the thing. Here's the teaching point. My dad is a multi-million-dollar businessman, entrepreneur, successful husband, father, grandfather. My dad opted out of technology. After he was the first in, he was one of the first out. My dad carried the Gordon Gekko phone. My dad carried a flip phone when I was running the business 17, 18, 19 years ago. And my dad told me he carried that flip phone for about 6 months, and he dropped it on my desk one day when I was the owner of the company. He said, you can shove that phone up your ass. He says, I go out there to close deals. He says, I don't need this distraction. So I did shove it up my ass, and my dad never, ever carried a cell phone again. That was 18, 19 years ago. So he had the Gordon Gekko phone, he had this flip phone, so did my mom, and they both opted out. And then they had the internet at home, and they had the internet, and they just opted out. This is when my dad was still in business. He was still an executive at our company. He was still dealing with multi-million-dollar accounts and clients. Did my dad carry a cell phone? No. Did he text? No. Did he take cell phone calls? No. He had email at the office, and he had a real landline. A guy looking after a $17 million book of business. And he was first in and he was first out. Same with social media and all that stuff. My dad, we showed it to him maybe 10 years ago, and he's like, who in the hell would want that? He says, only an unbusy person would want that. He looked at Facebook and he looked at all that stuff, and he's like, he goes, that's for people that don't have a life. He says that's for people that don't respect their own personal time. So he's never been involved in that. He's never watched online news and stuff. I said, Dad, you can Google this. And he's like, why? He goes, I got 3 newspapers coming today. I got Forbes magazine. I got Entrepreneur magazine. I got Sports Illustrated. He just reads them and recycles them, reads them and recycles them. I was over there on Sunday and Monday, and the books beside his reading chair, okay, I'm 6 foot tall. The books were 5 feet. Books, 5 feet. I'm like, Dad, where'd you get all these books? He goes, well, from you and your brother. And he's just piling through these now that he's retired. Like, I'm talking Stephen King books, except they're not Stephen King. They're just everything under the sun. So my dad is a voracious reader. But he was first into technology, and he was also the first out when he was still a very, very serious businessman. That's about it. Diet, health, community. My dad has always been such a generous local guy. I learned local giving from my dad. Like he says, Michael, he says, check out the company's budgets before you give to cancer. You see the CEOs making $1 million, or he says, you know, check out the food bank. And now he says all of a sudden they got a COO and they got people on staff. He said, give to charities. He says that make an impact where every dollar goes to the people in need. And he says, that's what you got to focus on. He says, you have to do your due diligence with charities. And he says, once you have a good handful of them, he says, commit your life to supporting them. But he says, if those charities become big businesses, if they become part of the poverty industry where it's all about business and the people in need don't really get the money, he said, just pull your money out of there and find somewhere else to put it. So he really believes and preaches grassroots community service. He said, give your time, and he says, give your money. But he says grassroots, 8 out of 10, 80%, he says, of your giving, grassroots community. And he said, make sure they're run by volunteers and people that have a passion for helping those people. And then he said, that's the way to give, that it actually helps the people it's supposed to give. So that's what my dad thinks of 2022. Bullish, optimistic, passionate, absolutely obsessed with living, and driving a 4-wheeler this past Canadian Thanksgiving. Just unbelievable. You know what? Age is a number. Age is a number. Age is a number. My dad doesn't get a wash in those swamps. He doesn't participate in any of the garbage the politics really. You know, he looks at it from a standpoint of education. He sees it for the game it is. And like my dad says, there's nothing new under the sun, Michael. There's nothing new under the sun. You just need to know how to filter 99.9% of it and put it in the recycle bin. 99.9% of it, he told me, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Keep coming home to your family. Keep coming home to your family. Keep inviting your wife. Keep walking in nature. Keep taking care of yourself. Eat foods that give you energy. Eat foods that make you younger. Eat books that grow your brain. Have great people in your life. Cut anything out of your life that's toxic and poisonous. And it's very simple, very, very simple when you get down to it. And he's just like, say no to everything, say no to everything, say no to everything. Does that fit in my world? No. Does that fit in my world anymore? No, no, just keep pushing it out, keep pushing it out. And every day, write down your 1 or 2 goals in your journal. Write them down, write them down. And my dad's an affirmation guy big time. He's always, you know, I always used to say, Dad, did you see yourself, you know, when you started with nothing, did you see yourself having any of this success? And he's like, I saw every fucking second of it. He's a visualization guy like most billionaires are, like all pro athletes are. My dad is a visualization guy. He's already seen it. He saw himself being successful. He saw his companies winning. He saw himself hiring people. He saw himself in a successful, loving marriage. He saw himself as a father. He saw himself as a grandfather. He saw himself winning. So there you go. Success leaves clues, man. I hope you enjoyed that little trip down memory lane. We don't do enough of this stuff, asking the people who've already been there, who've already built a badass millionaire world. My dad built a badass millionaire world. He's lived in it for basically almost 90 years, almost 90 years. That is worth listening to that call. That's called proven advice. Winning has all day for that type of advice. That's not some wet behind the ears 23-year-old life coach. That's not some 45-year-old guy who's never won anything. That's from a champion who's been on this earth for almost 90 glorious years. Bottom line, that's what my 89-year-old father thinks of this crazy, asinine, badass world. This Thursday, we go at it again. If you have a business that doesn't serve you and you have a high-paying job, you need to get that fixed this Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm doing a free web training, how to create the ultimate badass millionaire lifestyle business. When I build a business, it's to support this. It's to support my life, my marriage, my children, my home, my cars. It's about me. And I'm going to unveil exactly how I've done that over the last 4 different businesses, 4 different industries over the last almost 20 years. How I went from a slave to my business, from being no more than a high-paying job to having businesses that support the lifestyle of our family's dreams. I do that this Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern. There's a few lines left. There's a link below to sign up, and there's a link in the PS in the email. That's it for today. Remember to hug your wife and kids and tell them how much they mean to you and how much that you love them. 2 words that changed my life, 2 words that'll change your life. Be relentless.